So, equal pay for equal paint. How did this all get started?
Well, in the spring of 2017, we were both offered different positions on the same animated production. I was offered a background paint position and you were offered the color design position. And the rate they told us was the same, but it was also really low. And they said it was a union production. So we're like, okay, let's call the union and ask, like, is this rate correct that they're quoting us? And I spoke to the business representative at the time, and he informed us that the rate that I was quoted for background paint was incorrect. It should be about like $300 more per week than they had told me, but that the rate Jack was quoted for color design was correct, that actually was the union minimum for a color stylist, which is what that job was known at the time. And that information just completely shocked me because the fact that any design position was being paid differently than another completely didn't make sense to me, given my background and experience. Since I had come from illustration when I started working in animation. So I was trained to create a finished image, the figure drawing and perspective and color theory, like all those components go into the design crafts, but none of those skills are, any more difficult or, any easier than another. And, when you learn those things in college, like the tuition for all those, classes are the same. So the idea that you can take one skill set and somehow say this is less just completely doesn't make sense in terms of, artistry. And also, and from at that point of time, we were already working in animation for several years. I had already been working, I think like 8 years, and had been a union member about 5 years. And this was also something no one had even discussed or mentioned as like an issue. So that's all these things kind of just came as a surprise of like, wow, so color designers get paid like roughly $300 less per week. Mm-hmm. And you had also experience from like a previous production, right?
Yeah, I mean, because I had done, a lot of background paint in the past, but I had done color design as well, and I had never been paid the flat minimum. So even for me, seeing that number was really shocking, which is why I immediately called the business rep because I couldn't believe that was true.
Yeah. And I remember after having that conversation with our business rep, looking up the information in our union contract, just because I had to see it for myself. And sure enough, under the ink and paint section of our agreement was where the job listing of color stylist was placed. So that was, experience was fresh in, my mind, and I kind of couldn't let it go since, I'm like, why is this a thing? Like, it doesn't make sense. And coincidentally, later that year, Mindy Johnson published her book, Ink and Paint, The Women of Disney's Animation. And when I heard that book title, like suddenly all the puzzle pieces like fell into place, because anytime a subset of people are negatively impacted because of some sort of rule that doesn't make any sense, usually the culprit is discrimination. And the only logical reason for this pay discrepancy was because of gender pay discrimination. But we had to kind of do the work to really prove this point, and also get others to recognize it, because again, no one was talking about it. I don't know if you have anything else to add before
Yeah. I just think it was so baked into the industry at this point that people just took it for granted and didn't really think about why things were that way.
Yeah, and I think this is an issue that is difficult for anyone really to identify, because you need to know 3 things to be true. One is that this role is getting paid less than the other design jobs, which, we're so conditioned not to talk about our rates that, even though we have a lot of camaraderie in the design department and there is this feeling of equality with the other artists there, you wouldn't necessarily be in the position to know what everyone's rates are unless you're asking for them or checking them in the union contract. So that was kind of one point which, did come to light for us because of our situation. And the second kind of point you need to know to understand this is an issue is that predominantly women are the ones working in this job. And you might know or have that idea just through your own experiences of who is working in that job. And, in my mind, I was like, yeah, I do know a lot of women who are working as color designers. But we couldn't definitively say that without hard data. Luckily, we were able to get that information from the Animation Guild office, and it did definitively prove that color design is a female-dominated job. And not only that, it's actually the most female-dominated job within the Animation Guild. The data we last had uncovered said it was 68% women working in the role. And, again, emphasizing that animation as a whole is male dominated. So the fact that there's any female dominated jobs is exceptional. And yeah, the last kind of third point you need to know is true to understand this is real and happening is that the work that color designers do is substantially similar to all the other design roles, which are paid more. And I think that third point is the hardest for people to kind of really truly get behind and understand, because the job is already has been conditioned with bias for literally a century. So if you have never done this job, then you already probably come with this preconceived notion that it is easier. You're just coloring characters. How hard can that be? But once you actually perform the job or, are closely working with someone who's doing that job, you completely get a different kind of understanding and can truly appreciate that it is substantially similar to any other design role. And I can definitely say that as someone who comes more from a background paint side of things, that I don't see color design work as any easier from what I'm doing at all.
Yeah, and I mean, I've done a lot of different crafts in the pipeline, but before color design, it was primarily background paint, and I, like most other people, kind of shared that view that color design was, oh, that's the easy job. That's the one that beginners kind of jump into, and I only wound up working in it because I got offered a color design role on a show I really wanted to be on. So I just took it to be on that show. And yeah, first of all, once I started doing the color design, I loved it and I didn't want to go back to background. And second of all, I pretty quickly realized how much more nuanced and complex it is than I had given it credit for.
So yeah, I'd be interested to hear more about your experiences working as a color designer and as a man in this job that tends to experience sexism. How have you experienced these things, or how would you kind of encapsulate it for others?
Yeah, I feel it's the entire role and the entire craft that has that bias and stigma attached to it. So it doesn't matter what gender you are. If you're working in the craft, you're going to have an uphill battle trying to prove your worth, essentially. And it's always a struggle when you're trying to negotiate rates, trying to be heard. So you might think, oh, it's a gender issue, it doesn't affect me, but it affects any gender that's working in the craft because of that bias that's been baked into it from roughly a century of these conditions.
Yeah, so we thought we would just give you this background on us and kind of where we started from with this committee, so that hopefully you can join us in our fight for pay equity.